You're listening to the Good Old Boys Fantasy Football Podcast. Now here's your hosts, Kevin, Derek, and Alex.
All right, welcome in, ladies and gentlemen, to another episode of the Good Old Boys Fantasy Football Podcast. It is week 18, which for most of us means the championships, cash, and trophies have either been won or not so much. But that's where we are rocking and rolling at. Kevin is my co-host tonight. Kevin, how are we doing tonight?
Doing good, man. Definitely had a mix, and unfortunately some not so muches as opposed to championships. I unfortunately took a lot of runner-ups. I was the unfortunate opponent of either or both of CeeDee Lamb and Kyron Williams in just about every final I went against, and it was very, very tough to overcome. And some of my better players who had done well for me this season just didn't quite have the weeks that I needed them to have. So second still pays, right? So we got the cash accomplished, right? Not as much as what we wanted, but we did get the cash accomplished. But definitely not enough hardware for this season. So I got to do better. I hit the grinding stone. And part of it is you can't control who you go up against, right? I mean, I don't get to play defense on CeeDee Lamb in fantasy. I don't get to play defense on Kyron. I just get to go against them and watch them put up a boatload of yards and a ton of touchdowns.
True. Well, in real life, nobody was playing defense on CeeDee Lamb either. So, yeah, there's that aspect of it.
Absolutely.
So I also had a mixed bag there as well. I went 2-2 in my championship quest there. So hit that 50% mark, but again, would have liked to go on 4-0, and there were certainly changes that could have been made there in the fantasy streets, so to speak, that would have changed that outcome of some of those games. But it is what it is, and I am unfortunately Captain Hindsight here was unable to be Captain Foresight and tell me which rosters decisions to make. So that's all right. That's all right. Another successful fantasy season. I know some of y'all out there are still rocking and rolling through the week 18 championships or the dual week championships. And so if you guys have questions, comments out there, let's go ahead and rock and roll through those and help get you guys set, ready to go here for week 18 as well. We do have a great show tonight. We are going to start diving into the fantasy awards and kind of look ahead here towards week 18 as far as news, notes, and things to kind of be aware of as we get ready to rock and roll here through that. So, Kevin, any thoughts here as we kind of get rolling?
Week 18 is always interesting, right? Week 18 is where if you're in a championship, it can be the hardest as players sometimes don't play. They're preserved for health reasons and playoff situations, right? If you're a Lamar Jackson owner, I'm a little worried about week 18. They already have the number one seed locked up, right? So they're not really playing for anything this week. So if you're a Lamar Jackson owner, it's a great thing that he, I say it's a great thing. I went up against him in a couple leagues and he torched me too. That he got 5 touchdowns and went bonkers in week 17, because week 18, maybe not so much, right? He maybe only plays a half, maybe only plays a quarter. Like you just don't quite know in that type of situation. But there are some nuggets and players that you can really lean into, right? Players who are coming up against roster or contract boosts, right? Players who need a little bit of X, Y, and Z to put a little bit of extra scratch in their pocket. For example, let's see, Dalton Schultz. Dalton Schultz needs 4 catches for an extra $250,000. If he gets 6 catches, it's an extra $500,000. So if I'm betting, right, props or maybe DFS, or if I have the ability to play him, he's a guy that I'm looking at because players understand what other players are trying to accomplish here. And yes, the Texans are fighting for a playoff spot, but that doesn't mean that they can't, you know, try and look that guy's way maybe an extra time or two throughout the game and trying to help him out. CJ Stroud is very well aware of what Dalton Schultz needs. Who's another one? DeAndre Hopkins. DeAndre Hopkins is another guy. He needs 40, 47, 49 yards, something like that, for a $1 million contract incentive to kick in. I bet he gets that, especially with the Titans not having anything to play for, whether it's Will Levis or Ryan Tannehill. I bet they're going to force feed DeAndre Hopkins. He also has another, I think, $250,000 or something like that if he has 7 catches or more. So 7 catches, 47, 49 yards, call it 50, right? 7 catches for 50 yards. Like that's what they're going to try and get Hopkins at least. So again, little things like that. If you can do your research, you can dig into that. You can find little nuggets, especially on the sports betting side. It's a little bit harder in fantasy because you can't always control who's on the waiver wire and who you do and don't have on your roster. But for DFS and for prop bets and things like that, these are great tools of knowledge to know what these players need to hit these contract incentives, because their teammates will actively go out and try and help them accomplish said incentive. So definitely a little nugget for those of you who, maybe you're not playing for anything this week, but you can still play for some cash.
Absolutely. So those are some great call outs there. Anything kind of come across as far as your injury news, anything like that the folks might need to be aware of here?
They already declared CMC out, right? They're just going to rest him. They don't think it's anything severe, but CMC is not going to play against the Rams in week 18. So again, if you're in a dual week championship, or you started a week later and week 18 is your fantasy championship, if you have Christian McCaffrey, did I say CD Lamb? For some reason I thought it. Christian McCaffrey is who I'm talking about, so I apologize if I misspoke. I just had a brain fart. McCaffrey. So you were going to try and pick up Elijah Mitchell, right? Like try and pick up him off the waiver wire if he's there. Otherwise, you're going to have to pivot. So, Christian Kirk is coming back. He can be activated off IR. I expect him to be in the lineup for the Jags going up against Tennessee this week in a game that Jacksonville has to have to win the division. So there's possibly help on the horizon for you. Let's see. Stidham going to start for the Broncos again. Most likely Nick Mullins is going to start for the Vikings after the Jaron Hall experiment that torched me and every other Justin Jefferson owner who we waited all season long for him to come back, and Kirk Cousins went down and some merry band of misfits at quarterback. Meanwhile, the Browns pick up Joe Flacco, and he's doing nothing but throwing touchdowns and chucking it for 300 plus yards a game. So, what could have been. So I'm not bitter at all. So I think those are kind of the big ones that come to mind. Let's see. Take the Bills in the Bills-Dolphins game. Bradley Chubb tore his ACL. He is now out. So that takes away some of the pass rush there for the Dolphins. So it's going to be a little bit harder to get pressure on the quarterback, which makes the secondary a little bit more susceptible. And God knows that the Bills love to get away from the run game every chance they get.
Yes.
Again, not bitter about James Cook having a crap week at all.
You couldn't tell, not in the slightest. So,
yeah, I have so many sour grapes, man. Second place is first loser. There's nothing but sour grapes.
Oh, remember, if you're not first, you're last. So,
damn right.
All righty. Lots of fun here. And again, guys, if you have questions, comments, let's go ahead and throw those in the chat. Let's talk about those. Let's get you guys ready, set to rock and roll here for the week 18 showdowns here.
I'm going to pivot on you real quick because it wouldn't be a show if we didn't talk college football for 5 minutes.
Yes.
What'd you think of the New Year's Six and the semifinals?
So I I didn't get a chance to watch much of the early games on there.
Okay.
I did get a tune in for a good chunk of the second half of Alabama and Michigan, and I gotta watch a good chunk of the Washington and Texas matchup there. Overall, I thought we saw some pretty evenly matched teams there, right? Like this might have been the closest, especially at the end of when the dust settled. This might have been the closest collective semifinals games that we've ever seen, right? Like I can't remember another semifinals where everything was decided by one possession.
Last year was with Georgia, Ohio State, and TCU, Michigan.
Oh, see, I thought the TCU Michigan off the top of my head was a 2-possession game, was the way it finished.
Is it 9? I thought it was 7, but I could be mistaken.
Well, there's
Because
only
I
one
knew
way.
that one. I knew that one was a shootout, right? That was the high scoring affair.
Yeah, that was. You're right. It was 51-45 on that one. So it was inside that one possession. But that game wasn't. That game was a weird one where it wasn't really close, and it was. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, but no, I thought we saw some really good, evenly matched teams there. Now, what'll be really interesting to see is, this Washington team and this Michigan team, how they end up squaring off, and how these two are gonna end up playing off of each other here. So
It'll be interesting. I think I think Washington's going to have a hell of a time trying to throw it against Michigan. Right?
Mhm.
We knew going into this game, if you were going to beat Texas, you're going to beat them deep in the secondary.
Right.
It's just the weakest part of that team, and Washington and Michael Penix and just the game plan absolutely capitalized on the lackluster safety play. Some absolute dimes were thrown,
Right.
but some absolute coverages were blown as well. So,
That was one of the big things I kind of took away from watching that Michigan or that Washington Texas game. Well, yes, there was a lot of coverage miscues on the back end there, but even when the coverage was solid, and like Penix was fitting it into NFL sized windows, like he was making all the throws that you want to see a quarterback make, and like really looked all the part of all the hype that he had throughout the season.
Yeah, and he's going to have to do the same thing. The good thing is he has some familiarity with Michigan, right? Coming from Indiana and seeing them a couple times while he was there, he has a little bit of familiarity with at least the general scheming that they want to do. Different personnel, obviously, but that'll be interesting. So one of the takeaways, the Big Ten is not that good.
No,
the Big Ten's not that good. Like, we saw Big Ten and SEC teams go up against each other three times, right? Michigan took down the big one in the semifinal, but Ohio State, managed 3 points against Mizzou. 3 points, the great Ohio State. Come on. And then Penn State, that was no surprise to anyone who watches college football. Penn State beats up on anybody who's mediocre or bad, and they cannot compete against teams who are competitive. And it is what it is. My final takeaway was I've been really trying to be neutral about this college football playoff and understanding it is what it is, but you can't tell me. I don't care how many players Florida State was missing. The way that Georgia team was clicking, you can't tell me that they weren't one of the 4 best teams, because I think they would have beat any one of the 4 teams that played in the semifinals the way that they played on Saturday.
Yeah, I could see that, right? Like their offense. So the couple of times that I watched a Georgia game, right? Like I don't tune into every one of them like I know you do, but the couple of times I saw Georgia, right? Like the defense was always on point when I saw them play. The offense was the offense was not. The offense had a lot of opportunities. It seemed like every time I watched them play, right? Like they just never seemed to have it kind of fully going. And then when I tuned in and watched that bowl game, like it's like the like when you're playing basketball and the guy's on fire, it doesn't matter what shot he takes, it just goes in the hoop. Like that offense had that kind of chemistry just going, where it didn't matter what they seemed to do. Like they could have, they just they were finding the open player, they were making plays. Every one of them was firing on all cylinders. And you're right, like that's a tough thing to try and compete against, especially when you've got the talent like they do.
Yeah, yeah. So it is what it is. They couldn't control the fact that Florida State was missing a lot of guys, right? It wasn't just Jordan Davis, right? It was not just their quarterback. They were missing what, 7 defensive starters and 3 other offensive starters besides Davis. Like Florida State was a shell of what they were throughout the season. And they talked about that for a little bit during the telecast, and then they finally got past that point. They realized that they were kicking a dead horse, but it just uh, I don't know. I have lots of opinions. I don't think it would have mattered who Florida State had out there. I don't think they were going to win that game. Now, it would have been much more competitive, right? It would have not been the largest margin of victory in bowl history, beating
Especially the Orange
Georgia's
Bowl.
beating Georgia's own record from the shellacking they put on TCU in the national championship game last year. But I digress. We're here to talk fantasy and everything else. I had to get my 5 minutes and 2 cents out of the way.
Fair enough. I sat down and I thought about this. I figured out how to fix the bowl games and the transfer portal and everything else, right? Like fully, I think I've come to a solution that can fix this problem of opting out and everything else, right? So, one, move the transfer portal back to the point where players can play in the bowl games and not miss the transfer portal window. 2, right? A lot of these guys have their NIL deals. Well, put an incentive on playing in the bowl game as part of the NIL. If you're bowl eligible and you get X amount of a bonus to play in that game.
Yeah.
Fixes
Absolutely.
it right there. Right?
Absolutely.
Like you'll see the opt-outs, you'll see a lot less opt-outs. Because one, now players can play in those bowl games, and you can see, still make the transfer portal if that's what they want to do, and they want to pursue their college education and all of that somewhere else, right? Fixes that issue, and the fact that players opting out, things like that, like they would, and what a lot of that we seem to hear is they opt out of what a meaningless game in a lot of cases, from what we hear, right? If they're not playing for the playoff games, they're not playing for that, right? Like the bowl games are the bowl games and that kind of thing. Well, build some of that in there. Make it an incentive type of deal where if you make it to the bowl game, you play in the bowl game, you get a bonus essentially, and you'll see players not opt out at that point.
I think part of what makes it a challenge that NIL and the schedule won't change is how the semester breakup for these universities work, right? Some are on trimesters, some are on quarters, some are on semesters, and it varies. But most of these schools are on semester systems. Second semester has already started by the time the national championship game is played in most cases. So they miss the enrollment into the new school. Now, is there a way around that? Yes, there absolutely is. You'll do anything for a blue chip recruit, right? We've seen this across college football, but that is a weird transition where as if they opt out December 13th or 15th or 20th, right? Whatever that looks like, and they find their new school, they have a chance to pack up their belongings over Christmas holiday break, Christmas break, whatever, and move themselves wherever in the country that they need to go to get acclimated, enrolled in classes, and then 6 weeks down the road, you're in spring ball. So that part's a little weird. Now, something about it does need to change. And I do think the playoff system next year, I'll be interested to see how it works, but I do think it'll alleviate some of that.
Right.
Like you won't see the starting quarterback of a top 5-6 team, i.e. Ohio State, transfer. That's unheard of. Absolutely unheard of for the starting quarterback in a top 5 program to transfer out, say, no, I'm done. Like, what? Backups, you get it. freshmen who feel like they were, or redshirt freshmen, whatever, who sat a year and then were promised, felt like they were promised or deserved playing time that they didn't get. Okay, fine. Juniors who see the new recruits coming in and know they're going to be buried on the depth chart. Oh, yeah, some of those guys, whatever, that's fine. But for starters, like bona fide starters and all conference players to leave their top 5 program for a different opportunity is mind blowing to me. Like I personally do not understand that.
Fair enough. Alrighty, let's weave our way back over here to some NFL and some fantasy and all the good stuff in there. Again, guys, if you have questions or comments, let's throw those out and let's get those things rocking and rolling here to get you guys set for week 18. But in lieu of doing like Pine and Shine and Thursday night preview, because there's no Thursday night game here, Kevin and I'll be back for the last fantasy football weekly huddle, the Bet Set Snap, the Friday show this Friday, and then that show will be on the shelf until next season rolls around here. So we'll have all your game breakdowns and slates and all that good stuff here on the Friday night. But tonight, it's time to start looking at the fantasy awards to it. And so we went through and we've got some categories here. And if you guys have comments on whether or not folks should be out there, throw them in the chat. Let's get those added in there. We'll be posting polls through the socials, all that kind of good stuff for you guys to have a chance to vote on what you think and who you want for these awards here. But kind of going through it, right? We'll hit up some of the categories here. So first category, no surprise, right? We're talking the MVP, who had the most valuable fantasy season out there. Then up to, we've got Bussy McBusterson, which really is self-explanatory too, the biggest bust of the season. Best fantasy value, right? And that could be several factors there, but one of the big factors we were looking at was, draft position with outcome in there as well. The streamer. So what player was the best streaming option for you? Rookie of the year. So what rookie did you want to rock and roll through that? And then the league winner award. So somebody that you may have been able to make a trade for, you may have picked up off the waiver wire, those types of things to be able to plug and play into your lineup there to be able to be a league winner going down the stretch there. So let's go ahead and any particular awards you want to start it off with the nominations?
I'm good starting wherever you want, buddy. If we just want to go down the list, or if there's certain categories you want to hit and then save the...
I'll tell you what, let's go ahead and I have a feeling we'll probably be let's rock and roll through some of these, and then we'll just kind of play through it as we see. So we'll start off with the MVP, right? The MVP, they got the most valuable player. So what guy out there was the put your roster over the top to be able to compete and win for fantasy football championships out there. Some nominees that we have out there: CeeDee Lamb, Kyren Williams, Amon-Ra St. Brown, CeeDee Lamb. And again, guys, if you have others that you want to throw in this category, toss them out McCaffrey there. Who did I say?
CeeDee Lamb again.
Oh, well, yeah, that performance is very fresh in my mind. I'm sorry, CMC and Tyreek Hill also in there as well for that. So, Kevin, if you had to make a case for your favorite on this one, what would your case be?
My case for this one would be CeeDee Lamb. Really, the first 4 or 5 weeks of the season start a little bit slow out of the gate, right? As Dallas was trying to find their running game and do all sorts of things, and we harped on the show, right? CeeDee Lamb is a buy low candidate. I didn't realize he was a league winning buy low candidate necessarily at the time, right? We knew he was a dynamic receiver who was underachieving at that moment, but from that moment, the last 10 weeks, CeeDee Lamb has been on fire. He has absolutely been on fire. So, um, you know, a league winner came through in the clutch, propelled you into the playoffs, propelled you through the playoffs. And if you were a week 17 championship participant, maybe not single-handedly, but darn near single-handedly won you a fantasy championship. Like, to me, nothing screams MVP like a guy who showed up at the biggest moments of the season for the biggest times you needed him and performed every single time. And that was CeeDee Lamb, in my opinion.
Yeah, I can certainly see that, right? CeeDee Lamb had a fantastic finish there. And certainly a guy that managers were incredibly frustrated with to start the season, and certainly turned that around in a big way. The guy that I'm looking for and kind of giving that nod to, granted, little bit soured here in the week 17 championship, ended up getting banged up there. But I think that CMC certainly deserves to have his name on an MVP trophy here for the fantasy season. When you look at it, he came through and did nothing but deliver your touchdowns, had a tremendous season where, went out and delivered 2,000 plus scrimmage yards for you, 560 yards receiving, almost 14 over 1,400 on the ground there as well, putting up on average 22.4 fantasy points and half point PPR scoring. And this was a guy that was just dynamic, electric, and it could carry you a fair bit to it, right? Like going through it there, it's not until you get into quarterback scoring that any player was able to top Christian McCaffrey in points per game. And even at that point, only Jalen Hurts and Josh Allen managed to put up more fantasy points on a per game basis than what CMC did. And CMC was a complete and total difference maker for your roster. So that's my candidacy speech for CMC. Some other very deserving candidates out there when you're talking Kyren Williams, Amon-Ra St. Brown, Tyreek Hill. And if you guys have thoughts about why they should be there, love to hear it. Hit us up either on the socials or put them in the chat here. All right. Any other thoughts here on MVP, or ready to rock and roll into the next one? That's why.
Sorry, split screen's messing with me here at the moment. All right. But no, I don't have any other thoughts on that. I think each one provides its own argument. But I think all five of these are absolute kind of clear members of the MVP discussion.
All right. I like it. The Busty McBusterson candidates and nominees include Miles Sanders, Austin Eckler, Najee Harris, T. Higgins, Jalen Waddle, Jerry Jeudy, and Deshaun Watson. Again, if y'all have any other thoughts, candidates, let us know, and we'll add them to the list here. But if you had to make a candidacy speech as to which one of these guys was the most Busty McBusterson of them all, who would it be?
It's got to be Austin Eckler for me. And again, I can make a really strong argument for at least three of these guys, right? Mm-hmm. Because between Eckler, Najee, and T. Higgins, you drafted all of them by the top of the third round, right? Within the first 3 picks of the third round is when you drafted all these guys. Austin Eckler had the highest draft capital, right? Picked him up in the first round. In a lot of cases, RB2, maybe RB3 off the board. And it just never panned out, right? He had a short little stretch where you thought, okay, this is the old Austin Eckler, here we go. And then the last 6-7 weeks have just been nothing but frustration, right? His passing work fell through the floor. He was not getting into the end zone. His yards per carry was down. His broken tackle rate, which was never stellar, but again, went down, and just really deflated the top end of your roster. And it makes it really difficult to compete for fantasy championships when your first round pick does not show up. And unfortunately for Austin Eckler and his owners, that's what happened this year. And he knows it. He knows it. He knows he's in a contract year. He knows he plays fantasy football. He has his own podcast. This is nothing new. Some of it was game plan. Some of it was missing Justin Herbert for the last few weeks of the season, right? So there's a lot of different things that added into this, but the biggest bust because of where the draft capital was for me was Austin Eckler.
Yeah. I sat there and I'd probably, I'd be looking to try and make a case for any of these other guys, but it's really hard when you take a guy in the first round. It was consecutively the RB2 off the board in a lot of cases. And when you look at it from week 11 on, had a very difficult time, with finishes even inside of RB3 territory. But outside of week 14 and week 16 was very difficult for, usability in the fantasy space. And even like week 16 was wide receiver or was running back 24, which again, for what you were, where you were at and playing in the semifinals and all of that was still, if you played him, you did it because of the draft capital and you were trying to, go down with your studs, so to speak. And that's just a tough deal to try and manage that one. So I think I'm right there with you. As much as I'd try and pivot and go somewhere else, I don't know that there's another candidate out there. Miles Sanders, maybe RB20 off the board, was consistently like a 4th, 5th round pick, and gave you like 1, maybe 2 usable weeks all season. But at least with Miles Sanders, very early on that you saw that wasn't going to pan out there, and you could at least pivot and move off of that one and make other plans there.
Yeah, I think Najee Harris, right? We briefly talked about him. I'll kind of combine him and T. Higgins just because they were so close to each other. Were 2 others, right? T. Higgins had 3 usable weeks. 3 usable weeks. Spent some time out. Spent a lot of weeks just not producing. Helped in week, what was that 14? 14, yeah, 14, 15 was okay. And his week 2 performance, right, was great. But he struggled. Same thing with Waddle. Waddle and Higgins are kind of side by side, right? Those were guys that you were drafting late in the second round as potential wide receiver ones, depending on what you were doing with your roster construct, because you could get them coming back. They were considered top 12 wide receivers. And just did not pan out whatsoever. Najee Harris was another one, right? You Jefferson. If you went Jefferson 1 overall, there's a possibility when it came back, you were looking at Najee Harris as your RB1. Could have gone a different way, right? But you could have gone any one of those guys, Jefferson and Harris, Jefferson and Higgins, Jefferson and Waddle, to try and really solidify that position. And then you're going, and all of those busted, right? Every single one of those absolutely busted. So really frustrating for the back end of round 2 this year. In general, where these picks were coming off the board and the production that you got out of these guys. So made life very, very difficult to navigate through if you happen to step on one of these landmines this year.
Yes. All righty. Let's go ahead and talk about the best fantasy value. And when we're going through this award and we're going through looking at this one, best fantasy value really is guys that, ADP is baked into this one. So, there's a big component to where they finished, where they performed throughout the season, and where you drafted them, and or even picked them up off the waiver wire. So that's kind of where the candidacy comes to play on this one. Nominees would be Kyren Williams, Rachaad White, Puka Nacua, Raheem Mostert, Rashee Rice, and Jaden Reed.
I like all these guys, right? I like the value that all these guys presented. Raheem Mostert leads the league in touchdowns. Kyren Williams is second to Christian McCaffrey in points per game played. which is a big deal. Puka Nakua came out of nowhere to be a top 10 wide receiver in fantasy football, and through the first few weeks was lighting the world on fire. And then here at the end, Jaden Reed, as your roster got decimated with injuries, Jaden Reed and Rashee Rice, late round acquisitions, possibly waiver wire acquisitions in some leagues, right? They might have been picked up in a draft and then dropped and then picked back up, but really helped anchor your wide receiver 2 or flex spot heading down the stretch here. So I think there's a heck of an argument to be made for each one of these guys. I'm going to go Kyron Williams, because if you were patient, right, you got him late, so him going down didn't hurt you as much, right? When he went on IR, it didn't hurt you as much as losing a Nick Chubb, or even the Austin Eckler piece, because you had built a roster and then he got plugged in and earned your starting spot from a late round pick. But the output that you got when he played was phenomenal, absolutely phenomenal, and completely lineup changing from a guy that you were able to, get super late in drafts or pick up off the waiver wire, thinking that Cam Akers was going to be the guy there, right? And it changed in a heartbeat.
Right. Yeah, I really like that Kyron Williams call. There's, and in most leagues he was undrafted, right? Like he was going super, super, super late. Raheem Mostert's another guy that went super late, and it wasn't until we got to the kind of right before the season that it started breaking and looking like Raheem Mostert actually needed to be, fantasy option, fantasy rostered there. And for the folks that pulled the trigger on that one incredibly late, like that one played off there. But my fantasy or my guy that I'd make that case for would be Puka Nakua. Puka Nakua was a guy that was undrafted, even in a lot of dynasty leagues, was a guy that was, very last pick in the 4th round type of thing. But redraft leagues was undrafted and was on the vast majority of waiver wires, and then shows up, shows out, and just starts putting up performance after performance after performance for you. And then it was just very consistent. All, for the most part, very consistent for you all season long. And as a rookie, guy that came out of nowhere, I like the story. I like that. And to finish as wide receiver 6 on the season, I'll take that, and we'll rock and roll with that. So I think Puka Nakua would be kind of my vote for this one here. All righty. Any other thoughts on the fantasy value here?
No, I again, if anybody has any extras, feel free to toss them in. It was just these were the guys that we really liked, right? As far as where you got them, what they did for your lineup, and the boost and diversity that they played in for you.
Fair enough. One that we forgot to mention in there that I feel like we should add here, late add, but Sam Laporta, right? Guy that's most redrafts was undrafted or super, super late. Like even in our home league as that's a 20 round redraft type of thing. I don't think he went until like round 18, 19, something like that. Like he went super, super late.
Yeah, it was really late. I was looking at that before the show.
And he's a guy that finished tight end 1. So went from undrafted to very late in deeper leagues to a position winner there. So I think that we need to put him in the category there as well. So, alrighty, let's go ahead and move on through to the streamer award. And the streamer are guys that maybe don't have necessarily the fantasy value overall that the last category had, but guys that you're able to pick up off the waiver wire and play in a pinch, and potentially even work themselves into being a week in, week out starter for your fantasy roster there. So nominees for that would be Trey McBride, Brock Purdy, Jerome Ford. Thoughts on this one?
I think we could probably add Rashee Rice and Jaden Reed, right? They were mid-season waiver wire or streamer ads that ended up kind of finding a permanent home on your roster. So I do think we can probably add those guys to the list. But single quarterback leagues, Brock Purdy was a huge help, right? If you had guys going down and just struggling, whether it was Deshaun Watson, whether it was the Russell Wilson experiment, early season Dak before he got going, right? Brock Purdy was there. And then as the injuries kept mounting, the situation in Kirk Cousins going down, right? That was a big one. The situation in New Orleans between Derek Carr and Taysom Hill, or in New York with Daniel Jones, who a lot of people had as a top 12 quarterback, right? And just did not pan out. That was another one. Geno slipping back into the median after being comeback player of the year last year. So a lot of quarterbacks who under-delivered if you didn't get one of those top, 4 guys or 5 guys. And Brock Purdy really helped right the ship and bring some consistency to your fantasy roster.
Yeah, I like that call. Yeah, I do really like the Trey McBride thought in there as well. I mean, Trey McBride was a guy that, was
Till week 17.
Right. There is that, but Trey McBride was a guy that was, a lot of folks were not necessarily drafting. His rookie year was not a stellar performance. You had the questions at quarterback there. Kyler coming back certainly kind of helped that along there as well. Zach Ertz going down, Trey McBride for a lot of weeks was a guy that you were able to pick up off the waiver wire and help solidify your roster going down the stretch. And made it to the point of, even if you were a streaming tight end and you really kind of came in doing that for the season long, you were able to plug and play him and go, streamer turned into a weekly starter for you week in, week out through the back half of the season. And there's a lot to be said about that as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I did that in the home league, right? I was streaming tight end, I was bouncing back and forth and everything else, and I was able to grab McBride right before he broke out, and put him in there and never let him go. And it did. It transformed my roster in a time where I didn't have Justin Jefferson, in a time where I was frustrated with James Cook, in a time where Breece Hall, was iffy whether the Jets were going to give him the ball or if they were just going to get, blocked up front and he was going to have a really quiet game. So Trey McBride, because of seeing, 8, 9, 10 targets a game and 6, 7, 8 catches, definitely helped cover a lot of those warts mid to early late season and help right the ship getting ready for the playoffs.
Alrighty, I like it. Okay, let's go ahead and hit up the next category here, and that's Rookie of the Year. So the fantasy rookie that came out and just kind of took things by storm. Nominees would be C.J. Stroud, Sam Laporta, Jahmyr Gibbs, Puka Nacua. Thoughts on this one?
I'm going to go with Sam Laporta because of what having those points at your tight end position does for your roster. And again, arguments can be made for any of these guys. Gibbs absolutely showed out from the time Monty went down through the end of the season. Gibbs remained a steady feature in that Detroit offense and did a lot of great things. CJ Stroud, another really good quarterback to be able to plug in when you're having issues with Trevor Lawrence, Deshaun Watson, anything with the Jets, anything with the Giants, the Raiders, all these teams that had quarterback issues, and Stroud was great, but he missed time because of the concussion leading into your playoffs when you kind of needed him the most, right? So to win the award, for me, that kind of knocks it down just a touch. Puka started out great and then had flashes after that. He started out so great that his fantasy relevance did stay up in the top 10. But after Cooper Kupp came back, he was a solid wide receiver 2 with wide receiver upside. He was no longer a top, 10 guarantee every week type play. Laporta was a top 5 tight end every single week this year. Like, I mean, yes, he had a couple down weeks, but in general, he was a plug and play. Like, you're set it and forget it. I mean, you didn't have to worry about tight end. He covered a whole lot of warts, and now you don't have to stream that position. You're just playing him every week. So having a cheap answer for a position that is probably the most confusing and the most frustrating on your fantasy roster, with it being how used to be Travis Kelce or bust. This year was not so much Travis Kelce or bust, right? You had Hawkinson, you had Laporta, you had David Njoku down the stretch, who was just balling out. Kind of helped cover some of that, but having those guys in that tight end position does make a difference, and it allows you to do so many different things with your roster construct.
Yeah, I'm sitting there and I'm trying to, state a case for any of these other guys, but I think you're right. I think it's pretty much Sam Laporta on this one, for me anyway, right? Like, there's the tight end is that mystery position to the point where, right, and we've made the platform, written articles, spoken at it ad nauseum, that quite frankly, that if you don't have Travis Kelce most years, you're better off just streaming the position and picking up a guy and moving on and just kind of cycling through it, because you inevitably will end up scoring more points out of the position than drafting another one of these guys another one of those tight ends super highs. Sam Laporta is kind of the no exception to being that late tight end guy this year, and cementing himself on what I think will be a very bright future for him at the position there as well. So I think I'm right there with you on going with Sam Laporta. All righty. Let's go ahead and just hit up the league winner. And with the league winner, enough said with this one. League winner, guys that showed up in your playoff run and ultimately ended up winning you the league on this one. Nominees: CeeDee Lamb, Lamar Jackson, Kyren Williams. Thoughts on this one?
Man, I think a really strong argument can be made for any one of these guys. All three had good runs in weeks 15, 16, and 17. All three of these guys absolutely balled out in week 17. And if you were fortunate enough to have one or more of these guys on your roster, you most likely won your fantasy championship. So congrats, but I don't know that I have a clear winner here yet, Derek. Like, I mean, I know we've talked about this and we looked at it, and I've been kind of staring at it throughout the show, and I don't know if I have one over the other that I like as a league winner. I want to say CeeDee Lamb,
That
but
performance certainly sticks out there.
Right, but the 5 touchdowns from Lamar is massive, especially if you're getting 6 for a touchdown. Is massive. And Kyren Williams with 3 in week 17. Yes, it was 87, 84 yards, whatever it was, but the 3 tutties, like, massive performances by all 3 of these guys. But I don't see how it could be anyone outside of these 3. But I don't know if I have a clear winner of the league winner.
Don't worry, I do. So I'm going to go with Kyren Williams on this one, right? And a lot of it has to do with the fact that when I take the playoff totality with it, that does kind of seal it for me, right? So CeeDee Lamb, week 15, wide receiver 22, great, very good week in week 16, and then obviously the monster blow up wide receiver 1 performance on week 17 that won a lot of people championships, right? But the fact that you had that wide receiver 2 mark there kind of settles that a little bit for me. Lamar Jackson, I had top 10 finishes at the QB on that one, right? But week 15 was QB 10. Okay, that's at the back end of, especially if you're looking single QB, back end of what you want to be able to be seeing there. Week 2 or week 16, better. And then obviously the monster one there. Kyron Williams during the playoff run, running back 6, running back 8, running back 1, just put up really good, solid performances all the way through the playoffs there, and yeah, was a guy that was also running back 4 on the season. So there's a whole lot to be said there that he delivered all season long for you, and that was running back 4 even with missing 4 games in there as well. So but a whole lot to be said about a guy that during the playoffs comes in, puts up elite level performances all playoff long for you, and doesn't give you a dud all the way through. So not saying that Lamar or CD really gave you a dud, but they gave you in week 15, those performances weren't at the elite scoring outputs.
Oh, fair enough. Is Kyron Williams RB2 off the board after Christian McCaffrey next year?
Man, I don't know if he makes it all the way to number 2, right? Like, but I think he's probably close. I think he's probably I think for sure he's a top 5 running back taken next year. I think you have CMC up there. You probably see some of the bigger names out there, right? Like I think ETN might sneak up in there, right? Like he had a pretty big season long performance. Brees Hall down the stretch. I think those guys can do it. Jahmyr Gibbs down the stretch. I think there's some of those guys that could probably sneak up and into it. But I don't know that he's fully number 2 after CMC, but hard to make an argument that he's not, though.
I hope he falls.
Right.
And the reason I hope he falls is I'm drafting it the back half. That's where I seem to live in a lot of these redraft leagues. So I'm hoping he falls, because I'd be okay to take a shot on anchoring him if I can't get my hands on one of the top wide receivers. I'd be more than happy to anchor him as my top running back and then build wide receivers around him.
Yeah. In the home league, I don't think it'll matter if where you're drafting. I don't know that we'll be able to snatch him up with the keeper rules that are there. So
yeah, it'll be interesting to see how some of that keeper stuff works out.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's always the fun part when we get into that and seeing how that one looks and works and all that good stuff. So again, guys, if you have questions, comments, you think that we're wrong on one of these, you want to add a nomination to it, hit us up on the socials, hit us up in the chat here. Let's rock and roll through that. But Kevin, that takes us to the end of the list there. Any kind of final thoughts on the list? Or are we ready to head right into final thoughts period?
I think one of the streamers for the playoffs, especially, you could look at adding Zamir White, who had a really good playoff stretch. Not quite as good in week 17 as we thought he could have been. But the 2 weeks leading up to it, Zamir White was stellar, right? And was catching the ball in the backfield, tons of rushing yards on top of it. So I do think Zamir White could be added to that streamer list possibly. But overall, I mean, it's pretty clear, right? I mean, there's not many guys, right? There were no quarterbacks of note on that list, right? Brock Purdy for the streamers. Not Mahomes, not Allen, not Jalen Hurts, right? Not Dak. No quarterbacks on that list. And for a year where we were kind of as an industry touting, grab your quarterback early. Yes, it did help, right? If you had one of those top 4 guys, or really 3, because Burrow got hurt, Lamar was in that conversation with Burrow, he panned out. So you could say, 4 out of the 5 quarterbacks panned out if you took them early. But man, there were a ton of landmines. Tyreek, great, got injured, kind of faded down the stretch a little bit. AJ Brown, great at the beginning to middle, then kind of faded down the stretch a little bit. CeeDee Lamb started slow and then shot up. St. Brown's the one guy, he was kind of steady Eddie, right? St. Brown, I don't know if St. Brown ever had a bananas week, but he always had a solid week, right? And so just, again, just thinking about that roster construct, what's this do for you, and all these other things. So it's going to make for interesting thought process, right? As we go through and build a draft board and think about what 2024 has to come. Obviously, we got a lot of things between now and then, but it's never too early to start looking at this stuff and how, you can start to game plan at least a little bit, and what is going to be valuable and what is not, coming into your fantasy season. But it's going to be wide receiver heavy again, right? I mean, the running backs, yes, are helpful, but the running backs do not put up weeks like these monster wide receiver weeks do. And
Right.
and they just make a huge difference.
Absolutely. So, it's kind of crazy. As you were going through that, I was also kind of looking at some of the average draft position of the quarterbacks and the finish of the quarterbacks. It's really kind of interesting when you look at that, right? Like, so just kind of going through the list, right? Like Patrick Mahomes was the first quarterback off the board and was taken right at the back end of the first round in a lot of cases. Finished as QB7. So that draft capital didn't live up to that one there, right? Jalen Hurts finished as QB or ADP of QB2, finished at QB2, right? So okay, that one panned out there. Josh Allen was ADP of 3, finished at 1. Okay, that one panned out. Lamar Jackson 4, moved up to 3, so you got a little bit of value there. Joe Burrow at 5, didn't even finish top 12. Justin Herbert, ADP of 6, didn't finish inside the top 12. Justin Fields, drafted 7th, ended up finishing outside of the top 12. Trevor Lawrence, drafted at 8, finished outside the top 12. Deshaun Watson, drafted at 9, finished outside. Dak was drafted at 10, finished at 4. Tua, drafted at 11, finished 10. And Aaron Rodgers, drafted at 12. And we know what that one turned out to. But so there was, you're talking landmines, like the quarterback position outside of Jalen Hurts, Josh Allen, Lamar, Dak, and Tua. There was a lot of landmines in that top 12 QB.
Mm-hmm.
Now, if you were drafting towards the back half or towards the back end of that list with, Deshaun or Aaron Rodgers, as far as that goes, like at least at that point, you were spending 7th, 8th, 10th round capital in some of those type of picks there. But that's really painful when you're spending 1st, 3rd, 4th round capital and these guys don't deliver. Like that's hard to kind of come back from.
Yeah.
So
Yes, it does. It makes it very difficult.
Anyway, just saw that and was like, man, that is a list of maybe QB early was not the way to go. So anyway, I digress. Any kind of final thoughts out there for the viewers and listeners before we call it a night?
No, I don't think so. It's been a good season.
Right. I do want to thank everybody that's tuned in along the way. And enjoyed any of the content, has done any of the banter back and forth, all of that kind of good stuff. Really do appreciate everybody tuning in along the way and watching and interacting there. So thank you very much for that. Now, for everybody out there too, we keep going all off season here as well. So we'll be with you for the playoffs. Just doing some fun content there, and then start really getting into some draft prospects as well as the player profiles, players breakdown during the off season to get you guys rocking and rolling on that. And this Friday, last Friday show here of the season, and then just Tuesday all the way until the start of next season here. So Tuesdays, 11 p.m. Eastern, we'll be here for you, and we'll rock and roll through some fantasy content. But that's going to do it for us. He's Kevin. I'm Derek. Have a good one. Be safe. Toodaloo.